Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from around the world. My name is Stu Pringle and I'm your host for today's session. Welcome along to the second of a new series from Apollo titled Transition Pieces. With a strapline of putting the spotlight on energy innovation, each of our three sessions will explore a different topic within the wider theme of the energy transition. Welcome today to session number 2. So if you're here, you can be proud to say that you were here in the early days before we all got famous. Now then, today's title is Risk-Based Modelling of the UK's Integrated Energy Strategy. It is a super interesting topic, and I'm going to tell you now it comes with some strongly held opinions and joined with a desire to see real benefits to avoid future energy constrictions. So, what's the plan for this session today? Well, total running time is going to be around about 45 minutes. We're going to split it into 3 parts. We're going to have some initial thoughts from Donna Sutherland. We're then going to open it up into panel discussion. And then at the end, we're going to take some questions from you lovely people. So if you're watching on LinkedIn, if you type at the bottom of the box, just like you're answering a thread on LinkedIn, that will come through to us as a question, and we will pick them up in around about half an hour to 35 minutes time, and we'll see what we can do with those. So today I'm joined by 3 people. I'm joined by Angela Mathis, who is co-founder and CEO of Edinburgh-based ThinkTank Maths Limited. The company created solutions to design and deliver viable decentralized clean energy systems and operational atmospheric models to improve safety and sustainability of satellite operations in near-Earth space orbits. Easy for me to say. Angela is also VP of the Scottish Energy Forum and advises on several space-related UK international committees. Thank you, Angela. We're also joined by Donna. Donna Sutherland has 2 decades in the energy industry and is currently working with a small team to transform the Sullen Row terminal in Shetland into a regional energy hub, and is on the board of the Scottish Energy Forum. Welcome, Donna. And last but not least, we have Phil. Phil Westmorland is a process engineer. He is a fellow of ICAM and has 20 years experience in energy. He had an early career in mathematical modelling of process plant, but later moved into plant optimization and currently heads up Apollo's decarbonisation business unit. Unit aims to be a tour de force. I knew I was going to get that wrong. A tour de force in the energy transition space. Okay, I'm going to hand over to our panel in just a moment, but before I do, a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you on LinkedIn, please comment directly below the stream, and we'll pick those up as questions later on. I encourage you to get involved, so don't be afraid to say hello and say what you think as we're going through this. So that's your role today, is to get involved and ask questions to the panel. Our role is to give you some thoughts on this very interesting topic. So without further ado, I'd now like to pass over to Donna Sutherland, who's going to give some initial scene-setting thoughts on today's topic. Donna.
Hello, good afternoon everyone, and Stuart, thank you for the introduction. I think with the work that myself and others within the industry have done, it's incredibly clear that the UK has spent millions studying how to decarbonise our towns, cities and villages, right from the north of Britain, which is where I'm assessing in Shetland, right down to sort of Southampton, and from east you've got the Grangemouth and Teesside and Humber area, and of course you've got Liverpool Bay over in the west, and everywhere in between. I mean, it seems to be across the whole of the UK, multiple consultant agencies like Apollo are spending, significant time and effort with developers and other companies to look at how we basically improve our air quality in the UK. I mean, you'll be fully aware, since the Labour government came into power, within their manifesto, they're very much anchored to increasing the amount of renewable power that will go onto our network, and this is in pursuit of meeting our net zero targets, or at least our 2030 clean power targets in the UK. But when we look, at the forward plan, that will cost billions for UK energy customers. And I think when I reflect on where we've got to as a nation, there's a clear lack of an engineered energy strategy, which is actually underpinned with the right enabling policy. And because of that, for us, certainly, there's a lot of drag, and it's very much impeding progress. I think when we look externally to the external headwinds that the UK and others are facing globally, we're in a very different context about how we should be delivering our net zero ambitions, and because that has now materially changed simply because of the increase in external threats. And I mean, for me, you just look at the change in the climate, the extremes that we're seeing globally, even as well as down south in Britain, and of course the geopolitical threat that's there. And for us, when we reflect on what we'd like to deliver, particularly within the Shetland region, and when we look at the regional characteristics and benefits that we're assessing, it's very clear to us that the traditional approach and the traditional modelling and engineering configurations are no longer fit for purpose. For us, we're assessing an industrial site. One of the key objectives of our company is very much around simplification and looking to reduce costs and time. And when we look at this and take that on a national level, it's very clear that potentially the road that the UK government are following to add significant quantities of renewable energy onto a centralised system, will not be delivered in time, and we need to look at a different approach for that. I do think with the capabilities within the industry that we have, both from an oil and gas perspective and across the sort of energy industry spectrum, I mean, the skills that exist are exemplar. I mean, they're world leading. And we've got phenomenal industrial sites that exist today. And also looking at the regional characteristics, particularly the natural resources, and actually understanding, geographically, what is the right technology combination that can support the decarbonisation of local customers, and a centralised network will not, or will significantly impede the ability to deliver that in a shorter time scale and a lot cheaper. And we really are, within our project, looking at a really simplified approach. How do we ensure that we've got the right technology grouping to decarbonise the local region in that location? How do we reduce transportation cost of energy? How do we reduce delivery of the energy price? And looking at a regional hub configuration for us that we believe will improve air quality quicker. It'll reduce community objection if you locate your technology grouping within an existing industrial site, and crucially, this will maintain resilience. And resilience from an energy security perspective is utterly critical, particularly when you're facing headwinds such as we are. And that, for me, particularly when I look at an island region such as Shetland, ensuring or identifying opportunity to deliver projects that will directly decarbonise local industries. You'll not have to import your energy. You'll be able to ensure that you've got security of skills and jobs for the futures. You're able to deliver a low carbon sort of footprint project whereby you're repurposing brownfield infrastructure and actually drawing on the world-class engineering experience that exists within the energy sector. And to my mind, I think we've got a brilliant inflection point. We've got a new government. There's a real want and desire to be successful. We do feel, when I reflect on directionally where they're going about the clean power for net zero, I think there are complementary solutions to that. I think the actual spine of the centralised system still is important, but if we actually look at the regional characteristics of around the length and breadth of our country, we need to actually look and understand how we identify and deliver the regional requirements. And I do think, sorry, that I think working together with government, and we're noticing a huge appetite for that, which is incredibly encouraging. And I do feel that the skills exist, particularly in oil and gas, clearly because I'm biased. But we're problem solvers. We solve complex problems, and I think we've certainly within our team have come at this at a very different approach than the standard oil and gas capital delivery process. We've been incredibly nimble and agile. We've actually looked under and tested multiple configurations, and we might not yet have the right one yet, but directionally, I see huge advantages for this, for significant cost reduction, pace of delivery, and of course the ability to work with a community and deliver for a community. And that's very much at the heart of the energy transition mantra about, a transition's about, no community or industry being left behind. And we feel that if we target a regional opportunity, that this certainly provides that. And for us, I think if we look, and we do need renewable power, we do need these new technologies to come on, but as they're added to our energy system, this does increase complexity. And we need to shift our thinking from linear traditional modelling methods and really identify, agile adaptive modelling, because it's such a fluid space at this time. Technology maturity and new technologies are entering the market all the time, and we need that agility and that adaptability within our modelling configuration to ensure that we're able to change as new technologies come online over time. Yep.
Fantastic. Donna, thank you. That was a very comprehensive scene setter, so much appreciated. I just want to pick up, leading into the first question, you mentioned about linear versus decentralized. I just want to make sure that everyone understands exactly what it is that we're talking about during this session. So perhaps it'd be good just to do some definitions about what we mean when we say a decentralized energy system. And Donna, I think I'm going to give this one straight back to you, because you're on a roll. Give us your thoughts on this one, and then we'll move on to some of the chunkier questions coming up next.
No, indeed. So I think to define decentralised, if I've actually just briefly described centralised from how we see it. So, there's very much a strategy at the moment to add significant volumes of renewable power onto a centralised network. So in the UK, because of the way that our energy strategy is developed historically, we were previously very much a baseload country. We do still have, but previously we had significantly more large volumes of baseload fossil fuel generation sites. So these were your large coal stations, gas stations, and we've got a transmission network across the UK that basically runs, its equilibrium needs to remain from supply and demand baseload at all times, but that's basically your centralised system. It provided energy it supplied energy by generating from fossil fuel power station, basically directing it to where the demand was, and this was transmitted through the wires, the length and breadth of the country. However, as we look towards the future, adding in all of these or additional renewable power onto our network, every single time you provide variable wind onto the system, you need to then create the resilience, because that equilibrium has to stay constant. That requires additional infrastructure or technology, so technologies like the batteries. You need to then provide more grid pylons and wires to actually bring in those renewable wind generation units, and all of that then creates complex project on project risk, because we've got such a constraint within our grid connection process, because we've got a lot of projects wanting to get online. It's very much a first come first served basis, but there's an awful lot of speculative projects that are there at the moment, and as you're trying to add in all of these additional renewable power onto the network, that does require to have that equilibrium, that becomes very choked, and then it'll become very difficult to actually deliver. It then becomes very expensive. As you add in renewable energy, you then have to, as I said, balance the system, and that costs money. You either dispatch a battery, or you have other load shedding or other activity that will happen. All of that adds significant cost. You have significant cost to energy customers in respect to the HVDC cables that ties into the network. You've then got your substations, your converter stations, your battery technology. Then you've got your transmission costs, and then you've got your balancing costs. So when we look ahead and think of the complexity and the problem associated with that current centralized model, is looking at a shift of that. Can we look to redirect those electrons, avoid the network, and actually bring those electrons directly back to the point of use? And that point of use doesn't necessarily have to be end-to-end electron use from generation to offtake customer. It could be those electrons used for likes of hydrogen generation or other product use. And that's very much what we see. So when we look at what we're looking at within our sort of configuration, is there an opportunity to bring scalable large volumes of renewable power back to a centralized industrial site that can then be used, that green renewable power can be used to generate hydrogen. That hydrogen could be blended with a source of recycled liquid carbon, and that product could then be used to directly target the local area by using a low carbon derivative fuel. When I look at the configuration of Britain, we are a fossil consuming country. It's no different in the islands. And when we look at what would be best placed to support the island decarbonise, we're very much looking at how do we simplify, rather than building a significant offshore wind farm and spending money on an HVDC to put it to a location down in the mainland, could we bring those electrons? And when we look at that, the fundamental problem, in our opinion, from actually delivering a DES system, with a DES system being that you decentralise, you actually bring all the technology together in one local region that then supports decarbonising the region. The problem that we've got in the UK, there isn't actually underlying policy that's actually going to deliver success there. And the reason why is because private wires above 100 megawatts currently aren't permitted. So if you're trying to scale up over time and you're trying to avoid the very large cost of connecting renewable power or off-taking renewable power from the grid, it costs significant amounts of money simply because of our network charges in the UK, as well as our power prices. So looking at a configuration that simplifies that, in a decentralised way for local consumption, local use, that it very much avoids the need of that bottleneck that's been created on a centralised system, and actually looks at it, which reduces costs not only for project delivery and reduces project risk delivery, but also with the levers that we need to pull, given we are very expensive in the UK from a power perspective, we can actually identify levers that can deliver lower cost volumes of energy regionally. So that's what we see. It reduces the capital intensity and actually can deliver something fit for purpose, agile and flexible for the local region.
Donna, that's amazing. Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in some of the others into the debate here. I think we have touched on the definitions and why it's a good idea, and some of the challenges in quite a lot of depth there. But we've also mentioned about strategy, and in fact, in the chat, Brian's made a point. Is there even a strategy? So, Phil, Angela, I'm really keen to get your views on this side, given your expertise about what you're seeing in terms of that strategy and progress in the UK. So, Angela, I'd like you to take this one first, please.
Yep, sure, thanks. And thanks for Donna for scene setting so well. And I see Brian's points, and I see your versions of it, Brian. You're adding, and you've done the R&D, and you've done on the energy solution, and I get your point on this. Look, we worked in the Norwegian context, and we're a mathematics company. We deal with complexity and uncertainty in at a huge dimensional level. Some of the projects that the company has worked on in the past, and particularly in the energy sector. What is happening industrially, the strategy industrially? I think we just said, the papers that are coming out, the policy papers that are coming out, the whole concept of a distributed energy system is really quite nascent, but is becoming very attractive, for all the reasons that we're going to discuss here, very attractive. We've mentioned this. It's, if you've got intermittency from renewables, then you've got just because of the way it's generated, you've got a lot of problem. You move to, but we're doing that and we're building the windmills. So you're asking about what we're seeing. Well, we're actually doing this, and we're on a path to, by 2030, to build these power generating infrastructures. But here's the point. We're building them, but the strategy sort of kind of been, if you read, to massively overproduce because of the intermittency. So invest hugely above what we need, and still with the concept of tying it all back to a centralized grid. And I know there's a lot, and I'm not going to get into the politics of centralized, decentralized grid and who gains and who loses. But I think if you've got these, it makes sense from if you've got local ability to develop something, look and see what that local community's demand and supply is going to be. And it's easier to model that. You've got a sort of system of systems. So I think we're doing that. We've got bits and pieces around the country. I'm not quite sure if we brought in some of this logic, I think we would get closer to building something fit for purpose for a distributed energy system rather than by chance falling on it. I don't think humanity falls with anything if you leave it to sort of just, what would you say, evolutionary kind of unweeded garden process. That's not really great. So what are we seeing? I think, as Donna mentioned, we are hearing more and more an attractiveness. The government, the policymakers are starting to say a distributed energy system, is making sense. We are putting the pieces, as we say, we're putting the technologies, and some of them are still to come. And I think that's the thing we're going to touch on as well. There are new technologies that are going to mature. And how do we integrate those? How do we integrate those if we've already got a very rigid and fixed infrastructure going forward? And I take on also Brian's point of stop confusing electricity, energy and power. They're all good points, Brian. Thanks for making them. But I think, look, we're not working to a distributed energy system. We're here today to make the case and point out the advantages of this. The conversations we've been having with policymakers and with the current government, who's moving towards this very ambitious task of 2030. I'll let Phil come in. Phil, what have you got to say sort of in this?
Yeah, so moving away from policy and government in terms of sort of Apollo's client base and our industrial clients, as it were, are asking us to look at these types of things where they're looking at their own mini microgrids. They're looking at symbiotic relationships with nearby industry. They're looking at their own energy use and how do they get that from renewables. So where are they getting their heat energy from, and all of this, and how could they work with other industries on that. But one thing that has come out of some of that was a little bit scary was that clients say, we don't have to consider just this location. I know we're based here now, but we could move our site, and these are commercial sort of companies. We could move our site to a different area of the UK, where it might be better to get more renewables or private wire type arrangements, where they're looking to really do some decarbonisation. But also what came into frame was we're a global company, we could move out of the UK, which then was, hang on, don't please, we need your input to the UK. But also there's other decarbonisation things that are happening, such as Tata Steel down in Port Talbot. They're doing a series of decarbonisation and going to electric arc furnaces, but that removes virgin steel making for that location. So there's lots of complexity and things that are happening, and industry is not just sitting there waiting for policy as well. It is trying to identify and work it out what's best for them as well.
Mm-hmm. So come on, gang, what needs to change? Yes, Angela.
If I may come in again, again, talking about Norway, if you watch and see, because you're talking about people moving abroad, Equinor's traditionally oil and gas, but it's now a broad energy organisation. And if you look at their annual reports, and you look at their activities, they've set offices up in Germany. They're They've got footprint in the USA. Why not be a global player in this electricity generation, new power systems generation? If you've got a vision for this, and you see that you want to harness and harvest sort of local capability, there are still challenges to be done. If you just pour in sort of, I would say, the other thing that we'll touch on, but one of the big issues is, where do I invest? What do I invest in? And I think you can see people scrambling around on that quite nicely. Everybody's, you see BP, they're doing things for very rational reasons, and people are looking at it first principle, just as face value, rather than saying, well, actually, this maybe the strategy's firming up and they're seeing what's going on. So because if you don't have this, we've been looking at day ahead modeling, for example, and how would you trade? And if you can't trade and make sure that you're making money, then investors are not going to feel very comfortable either, even long-term planning on this. When you've got a lot of intermittency, a lot of renewables, it might be tidal, it might be, how do you store this energy? How do you put it on the grid at the wrong time? You're going to bomb in your price. So I think, looking at this, these are questions that major companies around the world are looking at as they internationalize, as they take advantage of the opportunities to step into the energy systems, the power systems. Okay, Brian, I can see you glaring out at me there in the corner. The power systems of the world, where you've got something to offer, where you've done the logic and the thinking, and you want to step in order to make that a bit of your viable portfolio for your new energy business.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Very good. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next question. We've already touched on it a little bit about the complexity of regional energy demands. I guess the logical next step is, why isn't this higher up the mainstream agenda? Why has this not been touched about more, or is it? Are we just not seeing it? And I would encourage the audience. It's lovely that we've got Brian as our fourth panelist today. And Brian, you're welcome to add more comments, but come on, and there's lots of you out there. I can see the numbers, so why don't you pop in a question as well? But Angela, I might come back to you on this. What needs to be discussed if it's not those big national targets?
Right, I think so. You are talking about, when you start talking, obviously a system of system, or you can be talking about a system of system where you're trying to model that, and you've got this intrinsic intermittency. We haven't sorted out storage, other than batteries and things, but there are other methods other people are looking at as well. How do you link those together? You've got to have them close by. Do you put it to a centralized system or not? But if you keep it local, and I think therein lies, when you've got that level of complexity and uncertainty, then I think this comes to the question you're asking. So how do you deal with that? We have done, and Brian, unfortunately, the papers we've done are for clients, so they're not public. But certainly, if you're with us, SSE, and you want to have a conversation with us, we'd be delighted to do that. So we have looked at, because it's our work, we have looked at how would you mathematically model, a situation that's mobile, that it's agile, and you come at you try to avoid coming at it with sort of very static models, or very simply probabilistic models, or dealing with Gaussian sort of a distributed uncertainty model. These are outmoded, and there are other ways to model these things. So I think these are the because the system's not fixed. We're bringing new things. We're putting more if you've got a policy that's putting more solar panels on houses, and then you decide, okay, we've now got tidal working. How do we bring that in? So you need this adaptability of a network, of a power system. And I think these are the things that are challenging, because before, we built a power station, a coal-fired power station. It was a huge base load. We knew we could keep the lights on even when people went to boil their kettle during favorite TV television show at 7 o'clock at night, when everybody went to do that, or during the football. How do you make sure you're doing that in the future? And how do you make sure you've got that resilience in the system? So I think these are the challenges, but they can be overcome through some of the very I would say, a fresh look at the modelling and a fresh look at how you actually conceive and design the power system.
It's not just the modelling, though. So it is about the modelling. It's not just what our current energy demand looks like. It's what's happening in the future. What does climate change do to the beast from the east? And we've had a beast from the east, and we've had in the height of the summer when we had 40 degrees a year or so ago, it absolutely stretched the electrical network. And there was some crazy spot price for the interconnector at 5,000 per megawatt hour. Some crazy number for buying electricity. So it's understanding social and climate change impacts on how we use energy in the future and bringing all of that into some of the modelling and understanding.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I just see Brian's put something up here, and again, which is very, very pertinent. Rest assured, Brian, we're there. We're writing papers. We've been, since the new government's come in, we've been, putting these papers to. I won't mention names because that would be inappropriate. But just imagine anybody you thought could influence the thinking on this, and we're not getting told to go away and and play in a corner. People are actually seriously looking at this and thinking, wow, as we have an opportunity here to rethink the power system of the UK for 2030. And yes, there are a lot of vested interests and people, trying to defend sort of, and if you like, extend the existing model, stretch it to whatever, but it's taken huge amounts. What is it, 60 billion on the power line, on the new power lines that would need to be going in, which again makes the system rigid. And what happens if you need it somewhere else later on? It's just this lack of agility. What I think the systems we're talking about, and we are making headway on that. So I'm not saying we're going to win, but I think when people are open and listening, that's always encouraging, isn't it?
Absolutely. Okay, well, it's good. We've had more than just Brian messaging, although he has written a book pretty much while we've been talking, but that's fine. All three of you are working on some amazing projects, and one of the things I was really keen to ask you, we've already started to get into it, is what role can innovation play in this? How can this opportunity benefit from innovation? Phil, and I come to you first, and then Donna. What are you seeing? What would you like to see in terms of innovation and technology and approach?
Yeah. So how does it benefit? So I think in a decentralized system, there's more focus on regional requirements. There's more local demand understanding. I think scale of what technology use differs, and it opens up the door to a lot more collaboration. And I think I mentioned earlier on about like the symbiotic relationships that could exist in a decentralized system where the local region is supporting itself, local industry and businesses are trying to make best use of what they already have in terms of waste products could be used on another site as a feedstock. Heat that's been dispersed by one company could be used by one, and looking at all of these sharing of energy feedstocks and co-locating plant and all of that will bring huge benefits to continue to drive down the cost of the different forms of energy, and then starting to really think about different ways of like peak shaving or extreme load cases. It might well be that we've got one type of technology that is the base load, and we have for extreme weather or extreme events, then we've got a different backup supply. And dare I say it, as a stepping stone, fossil-based fuels have still got that huge potential, but they only emit when you use them, so they could still be there to supply that resilience and supply that security of supply and make sure that the lights are still on in the hospitals, for example, and critical infrastructure. Because of the way that decentralized systems work, then it just lends itself to huge amounts of innovation to solve local problems. Very aware that it could be costly as well, and complexity in that. Ways that we can maybe I think we've got a bit back.
Oh, we've lost you a little bit, Phil, there. But I think we got most of it, so it was good insight, so thank you. Donna, you've been very patient on this one. I might bring you in and ask you your take on the innovation question.
Yeah, indeed. I think, I mean, innovation's fantastic, and I think for me, certainly, looking at the levers innovation brings, the levers to reduce cost. And what I mean by that, I mean, we're seeing, depending on your technology selection of your grouping, you know, what with very high cost of power in the UK, you know, looking at those technology efficiencies that you can get by grouping, you know, the assets together. The bit that Phil was picking up on there, particularly waste heat. So the grouping of use of systems or between two facilities. We've got an example, a really good example of that on Shetland actually. So Shepdee's power station, Lerwick Power Station, actually provides waste heat to the district heating system. So it's that best use of waste heat to actually support the local community and support their energy requirements, you know, as an exemplar opportunity. And that's what we're certainly seeing within our project. What technology, what innovative selection of technologies can we group together to actually bring the price of the energy down, the product down that we'd be generating? I think we're very much at the very infancy of this industry. The price point and the cost to generate and move from fossil fuel that's a global product to a regionally produced product, you know, it costs money simply because of the technology groupings and the cost to generate it is significantly different than extracting hydrocarbons. And I guess because of that, the innovation for us will be in the art of configuring the right you know, synergistic technologies together. And I think if innovation for me certainly brings in those benefits. How do you bring that price point of power down? How do you bring that efficiency improvement so you actually deliver a price competitive product? The reality is the government to date have not yet. You know, there's no demand shock, so they haven't addressed the demand side of this you know, complex problem that we've got in the UK. And I think you know, we're looking really hard at what levers we can pull through innovation selection, and that in itself would reduce cost to the public because you're not having to have this underpinned by subsidies. You know, we really need to have to look to, in the infancy, yes, it's very clear that we are going to need support through subsidies, but how do we then move forward? You know, the point that Angela was making about that need to be flexible and agile. This is a fluid time within the sector. How do we ensure that we've got a modelling approach and an innovative approach that actually sets ourselves up for success?
Yeah, I like this. Sorry.
Oh, everyone wants in on this one.
Oh, go in, Phil. Go on.
Yeah, I like it when you're saying efficiency, and I think you were saying efficiency in the electric, you know, in that side of things. But we also need to look at efficiency from how we use energy as well. And no matter which one we go, you know, which energy source that we go to, efficiency should be at the heart of how we use it to start with. So we you know, they talk about the use of heat pumps in homes where we need to insulate a lot more. Well, we should be doing that anyway, no matter what type of energy source that we're using. So we should drive efficiency, and then that will enable us to potentially use less of the future new lots of energy, which Andy suggested geothermal. Not looked at geothermal, but it is one of a plethora of many that we need to consider throughout the UK to replace the golden goose of oil and gas, because that is cheap and easy to use, really, unfortunately, but not very good for the environment.
I'd like to bring Angela in on this. I think.
Yeah, it was just a quick point. You know, if the predicate for a successful DES model is that you can model and understand better in a much more granular level, the demand. And the demand by location. I mean, you can't just take a city and say, let's take the city of Aberdeen or Birmingham or whatever. These are vast cities, and they have subgroupings within those, where, you know, you might have a mixture of industry and residential. You might have something which is quasi-rural and residential with a bit of industry and farming. And so you're looking at something very, very different. And so the need for all of that. So I was going to bring in, just when we're talking about technology, data science. I mean, it's our bread and butter. You know, when we do our models, we're basing it on we always say the data, the data that comes from the environment, and you're looking here at heterogeneous data. And I think that's where people are kind of stuck. If we're going to look at a reason why policymakers and people that have been thinking about this, who are thinking about, come from the established system and they're moving to something new, they're going, well, we've used this data. I mean, how many times have we as a company heard that? We use this data. And so why are you asking for all this other sort of circumstantial, contextual data? Because that's the world we're trying to model for you. So it doesn't look like it fits into a nice correlation where you can do a nice Gaussian distribution of it, or a nice kind of analysis based on existing tools that have been around for probably 30, 40, 50 years. We're now looking at this whole data fusion of heterogeneous data. That's big sort of geeky, mathy data science stuff. But basically taking as much information as you've got about this context and drawing from it the conclusions that you want. And there's where you are into really deep, deep, clever data science. And so I'm just saying that you need that in the mix in order to make all of this really work as well. And it's there because we've been doing it for years, and there's others. I'm not here to just blow our trumpet and make an advertisement for ThinkTank Maths.
Not at all. Okay, team, really, really good points all around. I want to just shift gears a little bit, because the title of today's session will be around risk-based modelling. It would be entirely remiss of us not to attack the question head on. So I want to know, how does a risk-based approach fit into this? Donna, I'm going to come to you first on this one. What's the
Well, I think that the reality is, I think the conversation today is probably summarised, and Angela very eloquently, summarised it there. I mean, for this is about the risk-based approach. How does it fit in? It's about getting down to that next granular detail. It's about being able to actually model, the total system, including the demand behaviour, and that becomes even more important as we evolve and our energy strategy unfolds over time. I mean, the reality is that we need to move away from the more static and fixed models that we've been using, simply because that was the power and energy context that we existed in. But as we move and we change and we look at our regional configurations, taking it down to that next granular level. I mean, Phil made reference to the microgrids. I mean, there's so many phenomenal technologies and innovations that exist that actually, that Angela's modelling approach and the team's modelling approach, can actually pick it up. And I think the biggest piece is that the likes of the weather forecasting of the past isn't necessarily going to be reflected or of the future. And it's actually that modelling approach that's able to adapt and understand and bring all the data points in from multiple sources that will influence demand behaviour. It's not just about incentives to provide the demand shock. It's actually reaction to external factors that will influence our demand use, our energy use going forward. And I think having the right robust modelling approach will save sort of utilities money. I mean, this is about providing an insight into how to trade the demand side to ensure that they're not losing significant quantities of money. Clearly, I mean, I worked on a trading floor in my past life, and I understand the very sensitive nature of the energy price to external demand shocks, particularly weather. And as we add in more renewable energy onto our networks, that's only going to become significantly more of a risk. And therefore, having an adaptive and agile model that is granular enough to bring in those aspects and continually evolve over time as the external climate changes will be critically important. And I know Angela's not here to sort of continually shout about our company's capability, but a company like the ThinkTank Maths that have that mathematical engineering capability that can underpin a regional energy strategy that then is aggregated up to the national strategy, which is absolutely what we need to do. That would be a world leading. It'll be an absolute exemplar, for the world to actually, look to the UK, identify it and recognise that the UK is doing something really quite unique, and that in itself is an exportable opportunity for us as a country.
Thank you very much. Any other thoughts on that one?
Well, I'm seeing Brian's question, which is basically impacts and probabilities. What are the impacts of considering as viable for the risk model? So impacts and probabilities. I mean, I think big sort of discussion. But I think what we have looked at is that fundamentally some of the limitations that have been noted is this a rudimentary modelling on the demand, for demand response. There's poor and incomplete handling of uncertainty. So I don't know about impacts, but there's just some stuff that if you port it over from the old world, there's poor tractability. So unpredictability of the inputs to map onto price market with reasonable computational time. And these are things which can actually be overcome, but they're perceived as if you're still coming up with an old mindset of the modeling world. But I think things again, the new storage tech, things if you're talking about in the real world, the new storage tech capabilities. If you're looking at flexibility services, then you really have to understand the demand much closer, deeper than that. I think this is a conversation I'd really like us to have with Brian. He seems a very informed sort of individual on this, but I think there are. And I probably won't do the question justice because I'm not the chief scientific officer of the company, Brian. So forgive me. He's probably watching this and try to by some kind of telepathy put the answer to your question in my head. So forgive me for that, but we can take that one offline in much more detail and do it more justice for you, I'm sure.
All right. Last chance, audience, to put a question into the chat because we're coming towards the end of the session. Just while we're seeing if anything else comes through, Phil, in the previous comments that have come in over the last 40 minutes or so, is there any others that we have, Brian and others that we have not touched on that you think is worth?
Jonathan White has something. Do we need government policy intervention to create appropriate demand? A guaranteed hydrogen kilo price. Perhaps the panel are aware of such moves. I don't know. Donna, you'd be closer to that than me.
Well, I mean, the hydrogen allocation round really was a competitive process to provide a strike price to give a developer a rate of return. It was basically driven by the actual developer's own cost, sort of price points and what the rate of return would be. I mean, we've looked at, how could government simplify that? To Jonathan's point, from our perspective, certainly, looking at renewable power, there's already a competitive process there, a CFD process, and then if you're generating hydrogen with renewable power, you then have another competitive process, which is your hydrogen allocation round competitive. And because of that, the government and the ESNEs are having to manage both. But if you could actually simplify that and solve to the right number that we need in the UK to be competitive globally, that could give the signal, the appropriate demand signal to ensure that we're actually delivering price competitive fuel, and that would avoid this import of energy at a significantly lower price that other jurisdictions are able to generate and still transport to the UK at a lower price than we are, simply because of the cost of our power. And if I ruled the world, which I clearly don't, we're able to put the right policy in place. I mean, it would be great if we could solve to 2 pence a kilowatt hour. And why is that important? Because we've got geographies like Brazil, Chile, US, a lot of the Middle East, are able to generate power at that price. And, I think for us, particularly in the early stages, to get that competitive advantage, we need to simplify our revenue support process and actually look at the levers. And if we have 2 pence a kilowatt hour, would avoid us needing to actually overlay the HAR process as well, because your CFD you could get for the wind farm would be the right price to be competitive globally. And I think that to answer Jonathan's question would then allow almost a guaranteed price of hydrogen, and then it's up to the developer to set the right technology to improve the efficiency to ensure that they're able to even more advantage there. So I think from that side, I mean, I'm not aware of there being a set price point, but that is very much around the HAR application. But I personally think it can be simplified and actually going upstream of that, because CFD has been established since 2010, 2011 or something, and it works. So why then overcomplicate it if those electrons are being used for hydrogen use is my reflection.
It would be for all needs to be thought about for all different types of fuels that are
Oh, absolutely.
not the cheaper oil and gas based ones, isn't it? Like the sustainable aviation fuels, which is out for consultation. It's your HVOs and alternative diesels, all of that type of stuff.
Okay. Any final thoughts? Because we're starting to run the clock down here.
I would just like to, and Donna touched on it, and she skirted around, but I do think there's something also here. You know, if you were developing, and I would, because I'm in the, you know, I'm in the sort of this space defence and UK sort of energy power system. That's where our business focuses. Some of the time I talk to space commanders from NATO allied partners, and without going too deep, I think Donna has sort of, you know, said it very eloquently, but people might have missed it. So I might just try and hit the nail a wee bit more on the head. If you're building a power system for a nation, and you're trying to do it in the next 5 years, the next 5 years are going to be pretty important globally, geopolitically. And I think not trying to avoid single points of failure, I think it's just another perspective of this, you know, we've sort of not said it, but not having single points of failure, but having distributed and that kind of resilience built into the system. You know, if you know, people don't calm down in the rest of the world and sort of decide that, yeah, we're quite far near the Arctic sort of zone and the North Sea and all that stuff. So, you know, I think we should be looking at it also, a distributed energy system also makes sense from that perspective, because it will give us that. You can take out maybe a couple of the power systems in one area, but then we'll have, because of the nature of it being a system of systems, we'll have much more resilience and energy security built in. Sorry for that one, guys, but you know I wouldn't get through this.
We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming. I'm going to have to start to bring things to a little bit of a close because we are over time. I feel terrible in saying that because I've enjoyed this discussion so much. What an awesome panel. I'd like to thank each of you for taking part and speaking your minds for the last 45 minutes. This session we will share on demand on LinkedIn. Each of your panelists are active and visible on LinkedIn if you want to follow up the discussion, and I'm sure they'd welcome your contact. The third in our series of transition pieces will cover the topic, is hydrogen the silver bullet for the energy transition? Very apt given what we've just been talking about, and that will happen before Christmas, so keep your eyes peeled for that one. So I'd just like to say a final thank you to our amazing panelists. Thank you to the audience for coming along. And if you enjoyed this, do let the team at Apollo know. You can message them directly through the LinkedIn page or give them a comment on this post. And that just leaves me to say thank you once again and have an amazing Thursday. Thank you.
Thank you, Apollo, and thank you for everyone with all their brilliant tonight. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.